gets her husband and can prove it, she can go live with her father. If she's lying, she's tied up and thrown into the river.
Is Pride and Prejudice?
Hammurabi's Law.
Huh.
1500 Babylon.
What was that law?
Babylon.
What was the law?
Huh? Oh, you'll find out. Eye for an eye.
Oh, I've heard of that one. You got that?
We were going through Hammurabi's Code and all these laws like Hammurabi. If you steal something, see what happens?
It's like your grandpa.
Yeah, and the legacy of that's still there in that part of the world.
I mean, probably stopped it from giving it again.
Isn't that what they did to Jack in the
But
Lion?
then what if you like
Or
became
tried
even more
to?
desperate?
Probably can't steal again if you don't have any hands.
I don't know. It's just like.
I can tell you stories. Are we broadcasting?
Are they supposed to respond or like?
I don't know. I hope somebody would. Okay, I have an empty desk. Oh, and I do have my computer now. They finally gave me a cord, so I'm going to see if it's working. Okay, so just a couple things, and then I don't know if we'll start the Fog of War today, but I'm going to start the Fog of War. And that's going to be a movie we're going to watch. And yes, it's about the beginning of the Vietnam War, but it's about so much more. It's one of the best documentaries ever made. And I'm not exaggerating, it is that good. Errol Mann made it, and it focuses on Robert McNamara, but I think you will like it. Sorry, I'm trying to get... Oh, come on. Just a second. I shut this off and immediately went off, and that's good. This is my monitor to make sure that it's recording. It's recording. There we are, live to the world. You want to get in the shot? No obscene gestures.
I bet you hate
I hope this... Okay, so, just a couple things about this, and then we'll watch Fog of War because it talks about not only about the beginning of why they got into the Vietnam War, it does a great job with that, but covers, I mean, Robert McNamara, who'd become Kennedy and Johnson's Secretary of Defense, is really one of the most amazing guys ever. I'm not saying necessarily it's good. I mean, as in he was everywhere. He was involved in all these things. It's just incredible. So that's why I like covering that. So this is the siege of Dien Bien Phu. And who are the people who are trying to I started watching myself. And it's exciting. Who was the one who are the people trying to fight to drive the French out, to become independent? Viet Minh. Who was their leader? Ho Chi Minh. And what did the United States do after Japan took it in World War II, right before World War? Yeah, the U.S. supported the Viet Minh, and what did they do to Japan after Japan took it? Embargo what? Oil. And that would lead to, and then got supporting that. But then why did President Truman turn around and support France coming back and taking their colony and not independence for the people of Vietnam? Yeah.
He wanted France to be strong. He didn't want to annoy them.
Yeah. And the thing about it's not quite the Cold War, but it's coming. So you have all that. So you have Dien Bien Phu. They dropped parachutists. They got supply. There's siege. My mouse is off. So here's what Dien Bien Phu is. This is what it's going to look like eventually. A couple spots here, and this is the siege. And the Viet Minh drug up anti-aircraft guns, literally by hand, up into the mountains, and could shoot right at French planes coming in. And they drug artillery. We're talking, these are many tons. And the ammunition, 122 millimeter artillery, so we're talking about a few tons to get up these hills. And they would soon surround this plane where anybody coming in would be shelled. They looked down on the French, so even when the French dug in, they're looking down and plunging fire on them. And it became hell on earth. The French couldn't get them out. They were barely keeping alive. They couldn't be there very long, and all through going into the summer of 1954, that's all everyone talked about. I mean, all over the world, Viet Minh. Here is the airport. You see the shelling of it. Here is a French transport plane dropping supplies. I really like this picture. Do you see it? See them? Those are the parachutes when they hit the ground, laying on the ground for the supply. That's right after a supply mission. But either the Viet Minh had overran that, or they're shelling it, and this would become. I mean, this is all everyone talked about. It was on in every newspaper in the United States. There were 2 television networks by then, and they had a 15-minute news broadcast. It would be in the early 60s. That would become a half-hour news broadcast. And they were reporting this. They were asking the President Eisenhower, what he's going to do about it over and over again. That is an example. There's a French plane being crashed. That picture, you can almost feel the glee of these Viet Minh. They shot down that plane. And they're so excited. You know, we're winning. This thing might be over. Okay, it won't be. But those are the French Marines going through hell. And a lot of the French Foreign Legion, remember I told you there were people from all over? And so the French Foreign Legion, many of them were the paratroopers there, and they just, you know, if you were, remember I talked about that, if you were like a convict, you could join. So many of the soldiers, where do you guess they were from? 1954. Yeah. In fact, there are a lot of them that had carefully hidden tattoos. Do you know what I'm talking about? The SS would put their ID number and tattoo it right here. And if they weren't captured by the Russians, the Soviets killed every SS. They found everyone, no question, shot. And so they would try to put on regular army uniforms or hide. And the Soviets didn't know about the tattoo for a while. The Americans and the British might kill them. French killed them. But a lot of them were fighting for the French. Isn't that kind of surreal? We're using former SS and Nazi soldiers, and some SS from France or Belgium. They joined the SS too. And so they're barely making it. And President Truman, or President Eisenhower, even sent U.S. transport planes to evacuate some people, and talked about the U.S. sending in planes to bring in supplies, or maybe even intervening. I thought I had a picture of Eisenhower. Yeah. Eisenhower even considered using American troops to break the siege. He even very casually talked about dropping an atomic bomb to break the siege and potentially starting World War III. Now, the Viet Minh were operating on their own. Yes, they're getting supplies from China, but they're on their own. But the Cold War thinking, they were all thinking that, Ike was thinking, that who's really directing the Viet Minh? Who? Yeah, Stalin. Okay, not Stalin, he's dead. But Stalin died in 1953. But the Soviets were directing this. And this might lead to World War III. That gives you an idea of the insanity of the thinking, even though Eisenhower always thought that was kind of garbage. And there's Eisenhower with his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. No idea. That's the Senate Majority Leader, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And this guy. And the United States had just started making this bomber called the B-47. Well, actually, they made it about 6 years. And they were planning, they had B-47s based in Okinawa. Okinawa is just a short fly to Dien Bien Phu. And Eisenhower said to Lyndon Johnson, would you be willing to support, or at least not actively go against, using these B-47s and dropping bombs, maybe an atomic bomb, to break the siege? And what do you suppose Lyndon Johnson's answer was? That's insane. That is insane. We'll look like we're trying, we might start World War III, and we'll look like we're helping the French be colonial masters, when we're trying to get allies from all these other countries that are breaking away from their colonial masters. Would they ever trust the United States? Johnson said, no way. And so the U.S. did not. actively commit forces. What is ironic about Lyndon Johnson saying that?
He was the one that later committed forces.
Yeah, he made it a full-scale war for the United States. The irony of that. And that's right, and then terribly wrong as it would turn out down the road. But, oh, and there we have them talking. I thought this was a great picture. I just liked Lyndon Johnson with a bow tie. So I had to put it up there. And finally, the French surrendered. And when the French surrendered, it's over. You know, this is one isolated battle. But the thing about a guerrilla army, they don't need to win a lot of battles. They don't need to do a lot to, or win a major battle. I mean, this is a relatively small battle. I mean, the French still have 500,000 forces. They control Hanoi. They control most of the South. It's not like they're being driven out. But this battle was enough to show that the Viet Minh can win a battle, and they're not going to go away. And the French are never going to destroy them. They have a line of supply, and they're going to win. Here are French paratroopers being marched away in humiliating surrender. The Viet Minh treated them very well, because they also knew that we're going to have a peace agreement. And we got to treat them well. And I like this picture, because it also shows, just by height, you know, the Viet Minh are a little shorter, Vietnamese, by statue, than the French. But who won? I bet they just love that. Yeah, you can be a little bigger. We win. We're bigger now. And the French, we're done. We're out of here. A French government would fall. They'd replace it with the Fourth Republic. I mean, this was a catastrophe. And then the Fourth Republic would fall 7 years later. France barely survived. This was a tough time for France. And they have a disaster in Algeria, too. One of the most famous pictures of the war. And this is a statue at Dien Bien Phu and a statue in Hanoi of waving the Viet Minh flag over the French corrugated steel bunkers. Dien Bien Phu would come to haunt the United States, too. And so that's what it looks like today. So I guess you take a plane. It's very popular. When my wife and I talked about going to Vietnam, the timing didn't work out. We talked about doing spring break, but then you'd have to get another week off. You know, that's a hint. You could start raising money, and someday people allow Americans into their country again. Probably not. Would you? But you take a plane from Hanoi into there, and you fly through the mountains. You fly into the valley. Here are some of the remnants of the French supplies. Here are the Vietnamese trenches. As they dug trenches closer and closer every night to the French lines. They could hear them digging away, getting closer and closer. And by the way, that should make sense. Here's the French fort. Does that look like the French fort?
Yep.
Pretty good, isn't it? So they would dig a trench like this, and then dig forward every night and dig another trench. Does that make sense? And the reason why it's simple, you dig till you go from about 100 yards to maybe 20 yards away. So then when you actually attack, you're only exposed for 20 yards. They could hear them dig every night. And they got to about 20 paces, and they said, we're done. And I know you're also thinking, but I want to play a computer game with strange characters for the French and Viet Minh. Yes, you can go online and play this game. No, I did not. So, last thing. So the French begin to pull back. And so they begin to pull back their forces. And pulling back from the Central Highlands, right here, is on a windy road in what's called the Central Highlands, not quite as jungly as the north, but it's going to be called the Battle of Mang Yang Pass, where an entire French battalion of over 1,000 men began to drive back. And the reason we're mentioning this is, are you out of here? What's up?
No, I'm just going to grab some shit.
Oh, sure, go ahead. I know I got cords all over.
Yeah.
But this long road, and they have a lot more of the south, but still, it's a mountainous road. And do you want to guess what happened? Ambush hell. All along this windy road, you can see it right here, and this shows it too. The long line of French vehicles would be attacked. In fact, this curve would literally be known as Dead Man's Curve, which is right there. There's a destroyed French tank has a howitzer on it, French armored car, and virtually everybody in that battalion would be killed. And this would be kind of the exclamation point for the French. Well, if there was any thought, well, should we stay after Dien Bien Phu or maybe stay in the south? No way. This would convince the French to pull totally out. This is the monument that still exists today on that highway that the French made. And after Vietnam was unified, they left it there, and they still maintain it. Well, the next, end of the year 54 into 55, the French, the Viet Minh, and representatives from Cambodia and Laos met in Geneva. And here they're going to lay out the French withdrawal. Now, the United States was involved, and their Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. And he is sitting there thinking, or he's trying to convince the French to not totally pull out. He wants the French to stay here. In fact, they're going to call the French basically giving in to communism. Now, here's an important thing we have to get. This is an important idea. In 1938, what was the German city where representatives, well, actually, Chamberlain from Britain, Daladier from France, Mussolini from Italy, and Hitler from Germany decided the fate of Czechoslovakia. And Britain and France allowed Germany to take part of Czechoslovakia. Basically saying if we gave Germany the Sudetenland, Germany will quit their aggression, and we can stop their, and they'll stop the chance for war. What was that city? Your nose is out. Gotta cover the nose, yeah. I know, math slip. What city? You should know this. I'm going to throw this pin at each one of you until you tell me. No. But it's a good guess because it is a city in Germany. Huh? Say it again?
Munich.
Munich. Everybody write down Munich. And I mentioned this in class last year, but I know we're online. And you get some stuff online, but it's not quite the same, is it? Everybody write down Munich. At Munich. Now, it was probably too late to stop World War II. But this would become this idea that Britain and France gave in to German aggression. And there's a name for this. Do you know the name? Appeasement. They're not right. Everyone write down appeasement. And Munich became synonymous with appeasement. Now, it's significantly more complex than that. But for years after the war, anytime it would appear like the communists, aka the Soviets, won, they would say, it's another Munich. It's another example of appeasement. And so what was Dulles saying? The Geneva Accords, the French are doing it again, and it's appeasement. Which is kind of ironic. The French actually were like, we got to go to war. It was Britain that was one that said, nah, Germany will give in. But anyways, Munich, and we will come back to that. Munich. One of the justifications Truman gave was we can't, to go to Korea, we can't allow another Munich. They would say this over and over again. Munich is giving in to aggression and soon be used as a way to push people to war. Munich. So what happened in Geneva? The French left. French Indochina is independent, and they created technically 3 countries, but one split. An independent Laos. And Laos would soon devolve into a civil war too. An independent Cambodia, a monarchy here, or Cambodia. And then Vietnam is going to be temporarily divided. Gee, we've seen this before, haven't we? Into North and South. North and South Vietnam. With the idea being in 56 there'd be an election. 56 will be an election. And they'll be unified. Now, they said the same thing about when they were ready sometime in the early 1950s for Germany. And there's still East and West Germany. And we know what happened to Korea. They are still divided. Sorry, I'm trying to help her. Now, the United States was furious by this. And Ho Chi Minh was overjoyed. This is right after the Geneva Accords. And that's Zhou Enlai, basically the second in charge of Red China. But there's Ho Chi Minh. And I like this picture for lots of reasons. But for some reason, it looks like Ho Chi Minh is just... But a huge victory. Now, let's be clear about it. To the people of Vietnam, this was, we kicked out a horrible colonial master that repressed and brutalized us and exploited us and took all, worked Vietnamese to death in the rubber plantations and then took all the wealth. To the United States, who won? There's another victory. Another victory. And so, one big thing that would change, though. In the South, after years of turbulence right after the war, in 56, a year of turbulence, Nguyen Diem would become the the president of South Vietnam. Now, remember on that map, you guys wrote down Hue is actually pronounced Way. This D is pronounced either Da or Z, TZ. This is Diem. So we have Dien Bien Phu and Diem. Just go with it. He became the leader of the president. And the great thing for the United States, they thought at first about Diem, was that he was South Vietnamese. He had fled Vietnam because he was opposed to French rule. He had fled. And so he is not a puppet of the United States. He is his own leader. We put him in power. Or I'm sorry, we did not put him in power. He was picked by the South Vietnamese. And that was a great advantage, and here is Eisenhower with Diem. And so we could say, after the Geneva Accords, we are supporting not a puppet. We're not supporting somebody that was put in by an outside power. We're supporting a homegrown president. Now, he would turn out to be a rotten dictator, corrupt, stole from the people, only appointed his brothers and things like that. But that's another story. That's down the road. And so, going into 56, Diem became premier, and they're going to have an election to unify the two. So it's Diem against Ho. Who's going to win? Well, Ho is going to win 90 to 10. The Americans began to realize this. The reason why is simple. Diem fled, came back after the French were defeated. Who stayed and fought the French? Who stayed and fought the Japanese? And one more thing. Even though it's a little more complex to say this is a religion, the vast majority of people in Vietnam are Buddhist. What's Diem? He's Catholic. Do you see the problem there? Who else was Catholic? Who? The French. So it doesn't look like to many Vietnamese, even though he fled because he was against French rule, doesn't he look like a puppet? And so what did the United States convince Diem to do? With money. But Diem's no dummy. He knew he'd lose. No election. With United States support, Diem said the election is going to be corrupt. No election. You got that? No election. And that would trigger the Civil War. Everybody knew why. Vietnam was supposed to be independent, but now Diem's going to pull out. And there's going to be a civil war. With between those, what are our sides? I'm really hungry. I just thought you guys should know that.
Thank you.
20 minutes. 20-minute lunch, right? So there's always stuff I got to do, and I got to set things up, and then I have like 10 minutes. I don't have time to eat. I haven't eaten since Monday of last week. But it just hit me, I'm really hungry. So this is what we're going to do. We did this last year a couple times before the world changed. We will have to have a pizza thing in there, where you guys bring me your pizza, I like it, I eat it in front of you. Who thinks that's a good idea?
That we give you pizza?
Huh?
That we give you pizza?
Yeah,
Aren't we in the middle of a pandemic?
to watch me eat. Huh?
Aren't we in the middle of a
I know that's why we have to wait till the world changes again. To pandemic 2, or maybe we will catch on fire.
Whichever one comes first.
Well, your pizza will be crispy.
Huh?
Your pizza will be crispy.
I like a crisp crust.
Good.
Yes.
There is a spot, like if you're far enough away from a chemical bomb, every pizza in a grocery store will be perfectly cooked.
That's some, yeah, the light some.
I don't know how you know that.
Science. It seemed to have a very hard way to cook the perfect pizza, but you know, you do what you can for
Might be the only
for
way.
gourmet. Back to the Civil War. So what happened was right after the war, right after the French left, you can probably guess what happened. You probably guess. Many of the people, especially Catholics, and they gave them the name Mandarins. Have you heard the term Mandarin? Okay, Mandarin, we think of Chinese in the language. But this also would be given to kind of the professional class, a Mandarin. Well, think about if you're going to work for the French, colonial rule, what are you going to do? Convert to Catholicism. That's how you, that looks like a collaborator. They fled to the south. Does that make sense? Who went from the south to the north? Who? Most stayed though. They might have been Buddhist by practice. Many of the members of the Viet Minh, because Ho's in the north. So they went north. Also, if they're a socialist, they went north. So you have over 1 million people going back and forth. And this happened, the legacy of colonialism. You know, in India would be almost 100 million people would go between India, what is now India, and Pakistan, or Bangladesh. And hundreds of thousands would die. Colonialism, that's all I'm going to say, yeah.
So who went to the north?
Members of the Viet Minh are socialists.
Okay, and then who went to the south?
Uh, Yeah, like people who had converted to Catholicism. People who thought they might be considered to be collaborators with French rule. And so that happened. But now there's going to be no election. And so once that happened, the legacy of the remnants of the Viet Minh started to rebel in the south. And the north, Ho Chi Minh realized, I'm going to take advantage of that. These are guerrillas. Wearing whatever clothes they had. And this hodgepodge of weapons that are some American weapons that they got from the French. Here's a British, or that's a Chinese weapon. There's a British Sten gun right here. Those are American bandoliers for the, guerrillas, whatever you have. And the North, realizing what's going on. We have all these Viet Minh here. Let's send them south again. So we can control the revolution. And they would create the National Liberation Front, AKA the Viet Cong. The North created this. It's actually one of the myths, and I mentioned this before, that the National Liberation Front and the Viet Cong were only a southern group. And the people opposed to the war would say, this is just solely a civil war in the South. Yes, but it's more complex. It's a civil war in Vietnam. And so most of the people who fought in the Viet Cong were south. Either they stayed or they went to the north and they came back to the south. But the North directed them. They were directed them. They maintained somewhat control, even though how do you keep control of a guerrilla army? So it's very relative. And so this is a pretty good picture. Now they're with Chinese weapons. Well, Chinese copies of Russian weapons. And grenade. And teeth. But they formed this. And by 1960, this was the guerrilla force fighting against the South. And what was their goal? The fight? What was their goal? Yes?
Have an election to turn the North, or get rid of the dictator.
It means essentially the same thing. Which in context means just in the most basic element. They want an election to unify, get rid of them, meaning how many Vietnams do they want? One. And that's what we got to get. They want one Vietnam. So the United States-backed government, what do they want? 2 Vietnams. And that's the war. 2 Vietnams versus 1 Vietnam. And this is going to put the United States at a huge disadvantage. The majority of the population in the area are consider themselves Vietnamese. And they want a Vietnamese country. Where it doesn't make sense to them why we have two. And this is where we get the Buddhist monks begin to protest the Zim government when the Civil War began. And so we're going to skip forward just a little bit. But this is going to become a weapon or something of the Cold War. Sorry. There. I didn't mean to hit the mouse. The Cold War. As the United States saw it, once the North started helping the National Liberation Front, who's really helping them? China and then the Soviet Union. And this is from Time magazine in 1959. And it's trying to show now the growing power of communist China as a dragon, on its way to take all of these areas. And if they fall, remember the role of dominoes. This communist threat is real. And if Eisenhower is following the Truman Doctrine, and this is so important, he doesn't look soft on communism, he's going to start sending troops, because that is how communism works. This is in the middle of the Red Scare. This was given out, this book was actually this little pamphlet. I've seen a copy of this. But a couple of things that's kind of funny about it. First off, of the octopus with Stalin's face. That'd be the kind of thing of nightmares, wouldn't it? And it's only 5 cents, different era. And this was actually given through churches. And then the Catholic Library Service kept it. Because one of the tenets of communism, at least Marxism, was that religion would melt away. So after the Communist Revolution, they got rid of organized religion. Basically saying, well, if religion will melt away, we'll hurry it up. And then 1960. I want to make you watch this whole commercial. So, John Kennedy in 1960 is elected president. We're not going to go to the election. Oh, this commercial goes on forever. I'll turn it up. Sorry. Yeah, it's louder! I want to echo through the hallways.
Do you want a man with spirit who is not afraid to fight?
You like it? You like it? You like it?
A loyal man who brings the job a fresh new point of view. Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up
Who are
to
you?
you.
Who are you? Okay. Kennedy was elected president. 1960. John Kennedy. How did Kennedy get elected president?
Now that, kind of commercials.
And he was Catholic. Even that turned out to be not near as big an issue as they thought. Not near as big of an issue. But Kennedy became president. The youngest man ever elected president. What party was Eisenhower? He was a Republican. Remember, he won partially by saying the Democrats were soft on communism. And now, those things I told you before, but now with Vietnam, what could Kennedy say the Republicans were? Soft on communism, and they made us weak. And that was Kennedy's big thing. I am from a new generation who understands the threat of communism. In fact, he called his program the New Frontier. And I will no longer do the Eisenhower strategy of letting the communists win. Now, that was not at all what Eisenhower's strategy was. But it was very effective against Eisenhower's vice president who ran against Kennedy, Richard Nixon. It worked quite effectively. And he ran with the idea that I will get tough on communism and I will find a new way to fight. And one of the ways I'll fight, I will go into places like Vietnam and win what they call those brush fire wars. Now, do you want to see Eisenhower's commercial? I've showed this a few times to you online. Do you want? And you saw it many times. Do you want to see it?
President, I for President, you
This is awesome. This is one of the first ones. Okay, so with that, JFK. And JFK, he's got to be tough on communism. And the Cold War is going to get, I guess the word is hot. There's almost going to get to the war in, it looks like it might be war over Berlin, while he is president. The biggest increase in the defense budget in history, peacetime military budget in history up to that time would be under John Kennedy. The biggest increase in nuclear weapons under John Kennedy. Increase in armed forces under John Kennedy. Draft numbers, there's a peacetime draft that started under Eisenhower. They drafted more people. Those ICBMs, Minuteman III missiles that are right now, there's now 100 of them at Malmstrom Air Force Base. The first ones were put in while Kennedy was president. Kennedy's whole thing was, I am going to do liberal economic policy at home and be tough against the communists. We are going to provide health care for the elderly. What's health care for the elderly called? Medicare, yeah. What's the old age pension you want to strengthen? Social Security. And I'm going to provide, we'll get equal rights for African American, this is 1961, men, but civil rights and the right to vote. Kennedy said he would do that. Now, he was not very good at fighting for him, but that was his plan. In fact, they literally had a name for it, guns and butter. I know that sounds weird, but the war, I'm going to be tough on communism, but make the country better. So he's going to follow in the legacy very much of, as he saw it, FDR. Even though FDR was not the rabid anti-communist, different era too. And so he had this thing. So Kennedy's coming in, I got to get tough on communism. If South Vietnam falls to the Viet Cong, what's going to happen to Kennedy? In 1964, Republicans will say, what about him? And therefore, he'll lose. There's a myth that Kennedy was going to pull the country out of what's growing in Vietnam. And that's just simply not. There's no way. Well, first off, we don't know he was assassinated. But at first it started in Laos. Laos had a civil war. And they started going nuts about Laos. And the U.S. started sending troops and secret advisors and CIA. And the CIA would keep a low-grade war in Laos going on until, it's actually quite remarkable. They would stay in there all the way until 1975 in Laos. In fact, that was their biggest fear in 61 was Laos, not South Vietnam. But then it would turn into South Vietnam. Please be the right slide. What did you say? Okay. This is the definition of an earworm. It bores a hole into your skull. Did you start over? Last thing. All right. And we're going to jump past the wise men. What Kennedy started doing is this. Kennedy started sending more and more advisors. Eisenhower would send almost 1,000 advisors. By the time Kennedy died, he would send 16,000 advisors to South Vietnam with the idea of propping up the Zem government. What's an advisor? There's a new unit in the United States Army. They started playing with it in the late 1950s, but Kennedy loved them. What are they? In uniform, in military, everybody copies the French. What are they? Green Berets, Special Forces. They copied the French, so they wore a Green Beret. And these troops were specifically designed to do a couple different things. Train armies from other countries, to train them. So many of them had language training. So all Green Berets, they have to know 2 or 3 different languages besides English. So they could train other people. So the idea was, that guys who trained in Russian, guys who trained in Vietnamese, people trained in Swahili. You think of all kinds of languages. And then they would know how to fight. That's what we got to get. Counterinsurgency. They know how to fight guerrilla wars. And so we could drop these people into Vietnam and they could train them to fight. Well, how do you train South Vietnamese soldiers to fight Viet Cong? You got to go into the jungle with them. And soon there's also going to be helicopters that'll fly the South Vietnamese army. And what happened almost immediately to some of these men? If they're in combat, they're there while they might be attacked by guerrillas or going into combat. What's happening? A hot weapon in the Cold War. The first American to die in Vietnam died in 1959. So if you go to the Vietnam Memorial, it's done by age and the approximate time that they were killed. Shoot, I want to get past one thing. So, tomorrow there'll be that quiz over the 2 reading, right? I signed that yesterday, okay? I'll just post that, and then I'm going to start the fog of war. And it's got to be on what? Teens. And so my expectation, you'll watch it. There will be an assignment that goes along with it. It's going to be very basic. You're going to like the video, I promise. It's really good. It kind of blows me away.
I like this not
Hmm?
I was just thinking to myself.
See ya.
Just talks to herself.
Yep, you know me.
Have a good day, everybody.
You too, Mr. Rogers. What?
I feel like I'm just... It's very hard to talk with this mask for long periods of time.
Yeah. I tend to mumble sometimes, and with the mask, it's just worse.
Say it again.
I tend to mumble sometimes, and with the
Exact-
mask, it's just so much worse.
Because you can't open your mouth the same way.
Yeah. And like it gets stuffy. It's just.
And your face feels hot.
Have a good day.
We'll see ya.
See ya.
Oh, cool. Patrice Lumumba.